Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to all of you from Montreal, Canada. I'm Frédéric Vogel, and I'm joined by my colleague Jessie Monnier and Eri Tamale. Online, we have my colleague Abhinav Prakash. We represent the Convention on Biological Diversity. Thank you for your presence with us today for the 9th installment of the Knowledge Management for Biodiversity Initiative. We are coming back from a break because the Secretariat has been actively engaged in Geneva, servicing the 12th meeting of the ad hoc open-ended intersessional working group on Article 8J. We have very good news on the knowledge management front. Indeed, the working group has provided crucial updates to the knowledge management component of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, incorporating elements related to the role of traditional knowledge and its relationship to science and other knowledge systems. We expect this document to be peer-reviewed in the coming month by parties. Now, let's turn to the topic of today. For those who have been on this journey with us since September, you'll recall that we embarked by delving into the world of effective knowledge management. We explored successful case studies on biodiversity knowledge management at the global, regional, and national level. We had the privilege of hearing from eminent scientists sharing their insights on biodiversity observation networks in the Asia-Pacific and Europe regions, underscoring the significance of stakeholder engagement, needs assessment, and the challenge of bridging the gap between global goals and national implementation, often hampered by funding constraints and political incentives. During last session, Mexico and Colombia highlighted their multi-pronged approach to linking biodiversity research data platforms, expert networks, and policy targets to enable continuous learning and evidence-based decision-making on biodiversity governance. For those eager to revisit or catch up on our previous sessions, you can find the summaries and presentations on our website at km4b.cbd.int. The theme of today's presentations is knowledge management to support national implementation, monitoring, and reporting on the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. To help us with this topic, we've invited two organizations that are very active globally in cataloging biodiversity data, information, knowledge, and success stories. Just a quick reminder before we start and delve into their presentations, please note that the chat and questions and answers functions are open to everyone. So feel free to ask questions to our panelists and engage with fellow participants. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to our first presenter, Mr. Tim Hirsch, who is the Deputy Director of the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF. As a leader of this intergovernmental scientific data infrastructure, Mr. Hirsch will discuss how open access to standardized biodiversity information can assist countries in implementing, monitoring, and reporting on the recently adopted Global Biodiversity Framework. Tim, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Frédéric. It's a great pleasure and honor to be invited to take part in this webinar. I'm just going to share my screen just to make sure that you can see the presentation. So the title of the talk that I'm going to give today is leveraging biodiversity data through GBIF, through the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And I think I would just emphasize that yes, a large part of this, of course, is going to be looking at the role of the primary raw data, if you like, and the flows of data in supporting implementation of the framework. But also, given the topic of knowledge management, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we as a network and an infrastructure deal with the knowledge that we have and we accumulate within our community that supports those data flows through skills transfer, capacity enhancement, and those aspects that are absolutely essential if that data is going to be evenly available across global regions. So just a summary of the structure of the talk that I'm going to be giving. So the first section is looking at primary biodiversity data, so that the basic raw baseline data of the kind that goes through GBIF, and the way that that acts as a foundation for implementing the framework. Secondly, I'm going to be looking at the approach that GBIF takes to support the construction and the maintenance of what we describe as national biodiversity information facilities, coordinated by what we describe as nodes to support data flows. And then a little bit about the approach that we take in our community towards enhancing the capacity to mobilize and use that biodiversity data. So to start with, I think it could be useful just to explain briefly what GBIF does and is as an infrastructure. So we describe ourselves as an intergovernmental network and data infrastructure. So we have member governments and international organizations that voluntarily come together to look at the best means and the tools and the investments required to provide anyone, anywhere, with free and open access to data about all types of life on Earth. And we work on the basis of a voluntary memorandum of understanding. And as part of that, we encourage the setting up of what we describe as nodes, so coordinating units within countries and within organizations to help bring all this data together. And it's coordinated globally through a secretariat. We're based in Copenhagen, where I'm speaking from. On the right, you can see, if you like, the final output as it appears today of the efforts of GBIF and our partners from across the world. We've been going since 2001 in terms of the portal, the website that gives access to all of the data that's shared through our network. And you can see from the numbers at the center of the screen on the right that we're talking about quite large volumes of data. So over 2.5 billion records that we describe as species occurrence records. So that's evidence of species occurring in space and time. And that's coming through to us from getting on for 100,000 separate data sets being shared through over 2,000 institutions from around the world. And the furthest figure you can see on the right there is our record of the number of peer-reviewed papers in research that have cited use of that data. So we're always, as an infrastructure, needing to look at, of course, how do we build the system and get the people together to share all that data. But of course, we always constantly have an eye on the end uses of that data and how it's proving useful to research and indeed to policy, as well as records about the occurrence of species, which is, if you like, the core of what goes into GBIF. We also have many other aspects that are associated with those observations or collection events, including nearly 150 million records that have images, as well as audio files, video files, etc. So there's a very large volume and variety of data being brought together through our system. In terms of our formal participating governmental network, you can see by this map that it's very unevenly distributed. We're much stronger in terms of national participants in some parts of the world, some regions of the world, than we are in others. And we're always, of course, working with governments to either bring them in for the first time or bring countries back into active participation. But we also bring together, as well as national governments, some intergovernmental organizations that are also members, such as, for example, SPREP for the Pacific, the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity for Southeast Asia, ICIMAD for the Hindu-Kush Himalayan region, and the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization for the countries of the Amazon Basin, as well as many other organizations that are participating through GBIF, but don't show up on the map because they're not formal government participants. A more complete view of our network, in a sense, is this, which shows all of the data publishers around the world. So that's any institution that is sharing data through GBIF using the standard formats that we need to be able to bring all of this data together. And you can see from that it's a much more global picture. So in many countries, we have institutions that are sharing data, but we haven't got full participation from the governments. And so that's nearly 140 countries that are sharing data. So this is it's a big network that we have to manage, and we need the system to function well to be able to accommodate this very large data sharing effort. Then if you look at the sort of the final content, if you like, in terms of the data itself, you'll see again that it is distributed across the world in terms of the location of the organisms, the species that have been collected or observed and expressed in the data that runs through GBIF. But you can, of course, also see from that the hottest colors there in terms of the volume of data coming through to GBIF, of course, do not correspond with the biodiversity hotspots, because the sampling effort and the observation volume in, frankly, the northern countries and Australasia is far greater than in many parts of the tropics, where, of course, the bulk of the world's biodiversity is located. And so it's a constant effort that we need to encourage to even that out and increase the participation and the data sharing that happens in all global regions. Looking at what does GBIF do, if you like, as a machine, as a system, as an infrastructure. This looks very complicated, but I'll kind of go through it to simplify it. But basically, on the left, you can see very diverse sources of evidence that is expressed through data. In the middle, you have what GBIF does as an infrastructure to help provide access to that data. And then on the right, you see the onward uses. So just taking that in turn, on that left part, you will see that the kind of institutions that are sharing, publishing data through GBIF themselves are very diverse, from natural history collections, which in many ways are the origins of GBIF, agencies, ministries that are bringing to collecting data for various purposes, field scientists, citizen science as an increasingly important source of data, business as a source as well as a user of data, for example, through environmental impact assessments, academia, etc. And then the type of data that gives rise to can also be quite varied, or rather, I should say, the basis of evidence that then comes through as data. So obviously from natural history collections, what you're starting out with is a specimen in a collection. Observations of many different kinds, that could be photographs, could be sounds, literature. There's so much data that's embedded in both historic and modern literature. Sensor-based data, for example, through camera traps, acoustic monitoring, and increasingly DNA as a source of data, where the information about where species are increasingly is coming through sequencing, essentially, of the environment through eDNA, environmental DNA. And so what GBIF needs to do as an infrastructure operating both at the national and the international level is to be able to deal with all that diversity of evidence about biodiversity, about the world's species, and express it and handle it in a way that we can compare all of that and build up a picture of where species occur. And so that's the part in the middle. What GBIF does is, by providing the tools and the standards and the software for sharing that data, we make it possible and we make it as smooth as possible for that data to go into a central system and then be usefully available for onward use, both through our own portal, but also through platforms, for example, at the national level, which I'll say a little bit more about a little bit later. And then on the right-hand part of that diagram, we're looking at how that infrastructure then enables onward uses, which partly is through research. And so typically the way that people will interact with GBIF is via a research studies and programs that will take that raw data that flows through GBIF, put it into models, into indicators that can then lead to research conclusions and indeed policy guidance and indicators. And so you can see from the right part of that diagram that raw data coming through the system will inform research and policy across a wide range of societal benefit areas, including obviously conservation, but also and invasive species, but also benefits in terms of research and policy on human health, on climate change, and food security. And you'll see on the right there, of course, the CBD as a significant user of the data that flows through GBIF. So just bringing this back to the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, we've started to map some ways in which the availability of that raw data supports implementation of the different goals and targets across the networks, across the framework. Now, part of this relates to some of the data that will be going into the indicators that are being developed as part of the monitoring framework. Some of that data is useful and essential in the development of national policies to address and make progress towards those targets. So just for example, and just following the arrows from that table to the 23 targets in the inner ring there, you can see that, for example, with target 1 refers to the importance of spatial planning, addressing areas of high importance to biodiversity. Well, the identification of key biodiversity areas is part of that, and you need the raw data to help in the identification of key biodiversity areas. With the restoration targets, we need the basic information, both historic data and then continuing monitoring data, to understand the species that were originally made up, degraded ecosystems, and then monitor as those species come back. The 30 by 30 target, we need the raw data to help to identify the most appropriate location for protected areas and indeed to monitor their effectiveness. Data for conservation itself under target 4, for example, we need the raw data to support red list assessments of extinction risk. Invasives, again, the basic information, the data, all available data on where invasives have occurred and crucially when, helps in the monitoring of target 6. And then for the sort of the later targets within the framework, there's also a role that GBIF can play, for example, with target 15 on business impacts, providing a platform to share the data that is collected for environmental impact assessments, and indeed for businesses to understand more about the species that occur in the areas of their operations. And then finally, for targets 20 and 21, the activities of networks such as GBIF can support both the capacity development that's called out in target 20, and then target 21, really that's at the core of what GBIF supports, is the availability of data to support implementation of the other targets. So I'm going to move now to just say a little bit about how we approach that global community in terms of the national level. So, as I mentioned, when a country joins GBIF, one of the recommended actions is to set up what we describe as a participant node, or a unit identified within an institution in the country that has a responsibility for helping to bring together the data to go into that system that I just showed at the global level. So we have guidance that we circulate, which gives indications of what we feel are some of the essential institutional relationships and the functions and the people that should be ideally involved in this process at a national level to carry out the functions of a national node or a biodiversity information facility. So we divide that into four main functions that they need to be supporting their national research communities. They need to be helping identify the data necessary for policy and decisions, including, for example, with regard to CBD reporting. They need to be reaching out and identifying those institutions in the country that potentially have data that can and should be shared into the system to be able to mobilize the maximum amount of data possible, and then providing some of the technical services, often having a platform where institutions in that country can then share the data into the system. So it's an important part of that, and I think in a sense it's part of the knowledge management, is to share the best practices and the experiences of what it takes to set up a national node, a national biodiversity information facility. And one of the ways in which we have been able to help in sharing the outcomes and the knowledge that's brought together by our national nodes is through a system, a program that we've developed recently called our hosted portal program, whereby we provide the tooling and the hosting for websites that can be set up and requested on demand by our national members to showcase the activities of that national node, the work of bringing the data together. But then they can then plug into the global data system that we operate, so that the data relevant to their country or region is then available in a useful and functional way. So you can see here examples from Colombia on the top left, South Africa to top right, New Zealand bottom left, and then one of our regional nodes through SPREP in the Pacific on the bottom right. So this is a way of customizing and personalizing the view on data that the GBIF system provides in a way that's useful to national audiences. So I'm going to finish the talk now by looking at some approaches that we take with regard to capacity enhancement, because I think something that we always want to emphasize, and I think is sometimes neglected, is the importance of building and developing and constantly working on capacity to be able to participate in this global process of mobilizing and sharing data. So we look at it really from two sides. So on the one hand, our programs need to develop the capacity to mobilize biodiversity data through GBIF, but then also critically to develop capacity to use that data, because it's not a trivial thing. We are basically providing raw data of the kind that I've described, and there are various techniques and methods and uses of models that really are part of the skill base that needs to be built up to make this data as useful as possible. And we look at that from a capacity point of view at these four levels. So it means from the bottom, building capacity at the individual level through strengthening of skills and the building of a community of practice, institutional capacity to have partnerships, data sharing agreements, and so on that make it possible for this data to flow, and then the national biodiversity information facilities with the kind of functions that I mentioned, and then typically at the regional level, looking at how you can coordinate that community of practice in a way that enables those skills and that community to grow. Within that, we then have three basic levels of approaches or programs. So on the one hand, we have programs to support and develop the GBIF nodes themselves through international collaboration and sharing of knowledge, then strengthening the skills and opportunities for individuals to contribute to the work, and then developing regional communities of practice to expand GBIF's reach beyond where our current national members are. So just some examples of that in terms of the collaboration between our nodes. We have a program which we call the GBIF Capacity Enhancement Support Program, where we have some funds every year that help nodes to share that knowledge, to set up mentoring arrangements, workshops that can help to build up that activity into new regions as we grow our membership. In terms of we have a training strategy, so we provide resources through a curriculum, through developing of digital documentation, because there's a lot of technical knowledge that needs to be captured and is easily available. We have something that we call the Data Use Club. So that's a global program where we focus on particular aspects of how best to use that data. And we have regular editions of that to build that understanding of using data. And in all of this, we rely very heavily on volunteers across our community to be providing that mentorship and that training to support all of this program and knowledge sharing. So in terms of the building up of the curriculum, these are some of the components and the approaches that we have to develop this knowledge development. So it's collaborative, and we work on making sure that there are clear learning objectives to all of our courses. And one of the things that I think we also find very important is when we bring people into often quite intensive technical training, we provide some level of certification where we have ways of testing through rubrics the extent to which participants in that training have really acquired the skills needed for them to work effectively with our tools. We also provide digital documentation across a quite wide range of functions that are needed to effectively take part in our data publication and use. And you can just see some of the examples there. In terms of our capacity programs, we are sharing knowledge based on the principles of fair and open data, and our overall approach is to support science and policy, including, for example, through the CBD. And I'll just finish with one example, really, of our capacity program, where we've just completed the first 7-year phase of the Biodiversity Information for Development program, which is supported by funding through the European Union and also through the JRS Biodiversity Foundation, that covers Africa, the Caribbean, and Pacific. And you can see from the figures on the right, this through a number of funded projects, over 100 projects in those three regions, have come up with quite significant outcomes in terms of the data that has been shared and the publications that data has enabled. But then also it shows the impact of that skills sharing in terms of the awarding of data skill badges to those who take part in the courses, and also then the replication of the core workshops that we operate, replicated in this case over 100 times in the target regions. There is going to be a successor to this program. We're just awaiting final confirmation of the details from the European Union, but you'll see from that the Biodiversity Information for Development program, which we hope to be able to recommence next year, we're tying very closely to supporting targets 20 on capacity building and target 21 on accessibility of data, information and knowledge from the CBD Global Biodiversity Framework. So do look out for news of that as it comes up next year. And that's where I'll stop. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, team, for sharing with us how GBIF can serve as an established global data infrastructure that can assist countries in leveraging open biodiversity data. This was very well addressed here. Thank you very much. So I encourage all participants to already submit their questions for Mr. Hirsch in the Q&A feature or in the chat as well. We will be monitoring those two channels, and we will address them after our second presentation. So for our second presentation, I'm pleased to welcome Mrs. Marie Fischborn. And sorry, I misspelled her name. I can see now I misspelled her name in the Zoom. So there is a C missing. So it's Marie Fischborn. And she's the former project coordinator for PANORAMA Solutions. It's a Healthy Planet initiative. And now she's a senior manager at IUCN, where she's in particular in charge of knowledge management. She can tell us more. So Marie is leading the team behind the innovative knowledge platform hosted by IUCN that shares solutions and success stories in sustainable development. Marie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Frederic. Give me just a moment to start the presentation. So good morning, good afternoon to everyone. It's a great honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you. As I was introduced, I've worked for IUCN, which is an organization that will be known to many of you. So I'll start by saying just a few words about our work on knowledge management as an organization, given that this webinar series is, of course, about knowledge management for the GBF. But the bulk of my presentation will be about introducing this specific initiative called PANORAMA, which IUCN has been working on together with other partners, actually, for a number of years. So we are a science and knowledge organization. This is what we are known for and what governments and other biodiversity stakeholders turn to IUCN for. IUCN is the global authority on the status of nature and the measures that are needed to safeguard it. It's a membership union, and as such, we can call on the collective expertise and experience of more than 1,400 member organizations and a network of more than 18,000 individual experts. And as an institution, we stand ready to support parties in achieving the global biodiversity framework. And in fact, IUCN has been involved over the years in helping to shape elements of the GBF as it has emerged. So knowledge and science and well, really knowledge management is really at the heart of what we do. More concretely, we generate and consolidate data, information, and tools that are essential to nature conservation and sustainable development. Some of the very well-known of these tools include the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species, the World Heritage Outlook, or ECOLEX, which is an environmental law database, also the standard and the definition for nature-based solutions were developed by IUCN. Many of you might also know Protected Planet with the World Database on Protected Areas, or the KBA database, Key Biodiversity Areas, World Database on Key Biodiversity Areas, and also PANORAMA, which I'm going to talk about today. Based on this data and information, IUCN also produces analytical work and knowledge to inform decision makers at different levels. So we frequently put out authoritative reports. You see some examples here on the slide. All of these reports and publications are available as free downloads on our website for everyone to use. We're also at the moment compiling a comprehensive response to a recent CBD notification, so a request for inputs on existing tools and guidance to implement the GBF. And so obviously IUCN has a lot to share in that regard. In terms of how we organize ourselves on knowledge management, well, we know that our knowledge is mainly produced and accessed by the conservation community. And one strategic priority is to broaden the scope with new audiences, such as the private sector. So we have recently established a knowledge management, learning and library services team, a dedicated unit to take this work forward. Our council, which is our governing body, has also passed a resolution tasking the Secretariat with the development of a knowledge management vision and strategy. We're looking to build new collaborations, tap into use of new technologies, partner more strongly with academic institutions, and explore how we can provide services around knowledge management and learning. One key element of this new strategic approach will be mainstreaming the use of existing tools, good practices, and approaches that we have already within the organization. And one of those is PANORAMA, which I'm going to talk about now. But before I do that, I would like to ask you a little question. And thank you, Frederick, for launching the poll. I hope this is coming up for everybody. So please answer two questions, actually, just to give us an impression of how familiar attendees already are with the PANORAMA initiative. Let's wait a few more seconds, allowing people to respond. Okay, maybe we can close the poll now. Great, and there are the results. So I see the majority of people who responded are not yet familiar with PANORAMA, which is excellent news, because then you'll actually learn something new in this webinar. And out of those that are familiar with it already, several people have browsed the web platform. Nobody has submitted a case study themselves yet, so maybe that's something you'll consider doing in the future after you've learned more about it. And then it would be interesting to know more about the other ways in which people have used it. Maybe we can get into that during the discussion. Thank you. So what is PANORAMA? Well, I think at the heart of it, it is a methodology to identify, reflect on, document, and share success factors of interventions, with the ultimate aim of supporting learning from these interventions, these good practices, and replication of proven solutions. And this methodology can then be applied through all sorts of products and activities. These good practices, these solutions are documented in a standardized case study format, and they cover a broad range of topics. I have an overview of the topics on the following slide. PANORAMA provides a neutral platform to conservation and development practitioners, and it really harnesses the idea of peer-to-peer exchange as opposed to one-way capacity building. It connects local action with global policy. It is actually called out in a decision from CBD COP15, the one on knowledge management, as an existing initiative that can support knowledge management for GBF implementation, drawing from local experiences, from good practices from the field. Unlike many other initiatives, PANORAMA takes a very integrated approach to knowledge management. So we broker the knowledge that is contained in these solutions through an integrated approach that combines online and offline tools and activities, and applies many different knowledge management strategies. So PANORAMA can play a pivotal role in implementing the GBF by serving as a hub for knowledge exchange, by showcasing successful solutions, inspiring innovation, and valuing local knowledge. And ultimately it's really about supporting better decision-making and design of conservation and sustainable development initiatives by learning from what has worked in the past. But why is it useful to focus on learning from solutions? Well, it's an interesting question that's very central to our approach. And in fact, learning from failure has a very good reputation and is really integrated into most societies. Society actually teaches us to celebrate failure and to learn from it. I'm sure you've all heard the quote, "to fail forward," or the expression. There are countless other similar expressions. And the idea of failing forward, of learning from failure, is the subject of graduation speeches and self-help books, and there's really a lot to be said for it. However, this is a headline from an article published by the World Economic Forum based on recent research, and that has shown that contrary to common beliefs about learning from failure, we learn more from success. And this is especially true when it is about learning from your own failure, as opposed to observing and analyzing how other people have failed or succeeded. So researchers have shown that our brain responds to success at the level of the individual brain cells, the neurons. However, the neurons show virtually no response to failures. And we know this from children and from pets who learn better and faster when they're being praised rather than being punished. But of course, success is in itself often the result of trial and error, or in our contexts, we might call it adaptive management or adaptive project implementation. So in the PANORAMA case study template, there is space for capturing all the lessons learned. So all these detours, if you see here that line on the right, that were required, all these adaptive actions to eventually achieve a successful outcome. And I have one final quote on this topic, which I think summarizes it quite well. Failure is not the opposite of success, it's part of success. And so both success and failure are somehow part of how we support learning through PANORAMA, but really taking a lens of looking at what has worked and why it has worked as sort of the ultimate framing. What do we mean by solutions then? We have a very broad and open definition for what constitutes a solution. It's a specific aspect of someone's work or work process that was done to solve a particular issue, problem, or challenge. Often there's a field project, so conservation interventions from the ground, but typically not an entire project with all its activities, but rather the successful elements of that. But it doesn't have to be projects. It can also be subnational, national, or regional processes. I have some examples of published PANORAMA solutions here on the slide, and the one there on the top left, the Micronesia Challenge is one such example. It's a regional commitment, and that is likewise, that sort of success story is likewise eligible, so to say. So it's really about anything that constituted a success story and that holds some valuable lessons that could potentially be reapplied elsewhere. So also very important is the fact that solutions as a whole are usually not replicable, but certain elements of them, and I'll get more onto that in the next slide, on the next slide. So if we think of the Micronesia Challenge, that probably cannot be done in the same way as it was done in the Micronesia region, in some other region, but certain parts of the process are probably very much replicable and could inform the design of other similar regional initiatives. So that then brings us to the idea of supporting replication and how the case study format supports that. Solution providers document their knowledge and experience using a standardized case study format, which looks at three main aspects of the solution. Firstly, the underlying context in which it emerged, so the ecosystem, the region, the challenges that were addressed. Secondly, and very importantly, the process. And here we asked the solution provider to reflect on the so-called building blocks, so replicable elements that were indispensable to the overall successful outcome. And those are really the elements that are potentially replicable and can be transferred to another geographic context. It could be the application of a certain biodiversity assessment tool, for example. And then the third element of the case study template is information on the positive impacts in terms of ecological and socioeconomic outcomes. All solutions undergo quality assurance through a review process before they are being published. I have this little graphic which illustrates this knowledge transfer approach in a very simplified manner. So you have your solution provider with their knowledge that is being structured, distilled, documented in the case study format, and including the description of these building blocks that can then be adapted, adopted, reused, integrated into ongoing initiatives or the design of a new project, for example, by what you might call a solution seeker. PANORAMA covers solutions from a wide range of conservation and sustainable development topics, enabling cross-sectoral learning and inspiration. So this approach of knowledge documentation and transfer is principally applicable to any topic. The initiative is structured into what we call the PANORAMA communities. They are interlinked with each other and overlap thematically, and they are actively being coordinated and animated. We currently have 11 of these communities. It's an expandable structure, so we welcome new partners, new themes. And you can also see that many of these themes align closely with specific targets of the GBF. As I said, PANORAMA takes an integrated and comprehensive approach to knowledge management, and it actually speaks to all of the knowledge management strategies that are outlined in the knowledge management component for the GBF. In terms of knowledge discovery and provision, we do targeted sourcing of solutions, for example, through specific calls for solutions or awards. And we support knowledge discovery by guiding solution providers in the process of reflecting on and documenting their knowledge. Our online platform is a very user-friendly database of all the solutions. It's a huge knowledge bank, so it's the main tool for knowledge provision for use by many different audiences, including practitioners, decision makers at different levels, and researchers. We facilitate knowledge exchange in an active manner through various projects of the partner organizations, which allow us to organize different types of exchange events, workshops, virtual or in person, for very different types of audiences to support exchange on existing solutions. And this is really about the community and about building relations and enabling that direct interaction for knowledge transfer to happen. We also integrate solution case studies as practical examples into training formats, such as MOOCs. The portfolio of case studies lends itself to analysis to look at common success factors that emerge across all the solutions on a given topic. So we do solution synthesis, and we compile solutions according to topics, so individual examples of solutions, but also insights from such synthesis. We have a publication series called Solutions in Focus, which packages these individual solutions and common insights across them for an audience that would be interested in a particular topic, such as this publication on the slide on wildlife health and zoonotic disease risk reduction. We also provide promotion, visibility, and recognition for the work of these solution providers and these knowledge holders through our own dissemination and external communications program. And last but not least, we build and strengthen communities of practice. These 11 interlinked themes of PANORAMA that you saw on the earlier slide actually constitute communities of practice. And we support networking and exchange within these communities. We also, for example, often have side events at major conferences or policy events where we then invite solution providers to speak and thus really bring their experiences from the ground to these global fora and processes. And we also have an ambassadors program. We're planning to strengthen all of these areas of work and align them more closely with the Global Biodiversity Framework. PANORAMA is a partnership of a diverse set of environmental and development organizations who bring in their different strengths, network access, perspective. So we have some very large and some very small members of the partnership. GIZ and IUCN are the lead or managing partners. We've been generously supported by several donors, and in particular, the German government through its International Climate Initiative. Now, a few facts and figures to demonstrate the impact of PANORAMA. We now have around 1,400 published solution case studies from around 1,000 individual providers or contributors and around 120 countries. The visitors to our website come from a larger number of countries, virtually all countries in the world. We have a large number of recipients of our newsletters as well, and around 25,000 individual visits to the website per month. So these figures are interesting, but they don't say much about actual knowledge uptake. What is PANORAMA's impact in supporting actual replication of the insights that are contained in these solution case studies? This is an area that we still need to get better at understanding, and we're working on that. We've developed a set of indicators that will help us to better document and understand and communicate our impact in terms of knowledge uptake. PANORAMA aligns well with a number of key principles for implementation of the GBF. It's a repository of documented good practices from biodiversity conservation and sustainable development, and as such, it provides a platform for organizations and individuals to share their successful experiences, which can then serve as inspiration and as models for others working towards the goals of the GBF. The GBF also requires a shift in how we value and respect local knowledge systems, and PANORAMA provides a platform for bringing together very diverse sources of knowledge, including especially voices from the ground, helping to make sure that all these voices are heard and considered, and connecting practitioners, policymakers, scientists, and local communities in the sharing of lessons learned and innovative approaches. It can inform decision-making, so the GBF emphasizes the need for mainstreaming biodiversity across sectors like agriculture, fisheries, urban planning. This speaks to some of the themes we already have on PANORAMA, like PANORAMA cities or agriculture and biodiversity. And this need for mainstreaming means that biodiversity considerations need to be incorporated into decision-making processes that were previously not focused on conservation. PANORAMA can show how this can work, and policymakers and other decision makers can use this knowledge to inform their decision-making processes. And then finally, the framework also calls for cross-sectoral collaboration at different levels. Implementing such collaboration demands changes in how governments, organizations, and communities work together to address complex biodiversity challenges. knowledge management facilitates to provide data and information on biodiversity and sustainability topics. These information sources are not always well aligned or integrated with each other, and often sort of good practices and critical information is scattered and difficult to find. And also, most of these resources do not operate at the knowledge or even the wisdom level of this pyramid, which you might be familiar with. So this is where PANORAMA comes in. It's well placed to contribute to implementation of the GBF by acting as an intermediary between policymakers and communities of practice, as long as it's clear on its niche and its complementarity to other initiatives and platforms such as GBIF, for example. So PANORAMA really operates at certainly the knowledge level of the pyramid through the individual solution case studies, which represent learning, reflected knowledge that practitioners have gained through application, through their work. But one could even argue that PANORAMA also touches on the wisdom layer through the publications and the synthesis that we provide, for example, because those really look at accumulated insights or patterns and general principles that come out from a large number of these case studies from practice solutions. So a bit more concretely, PANORAMA can support implementation of the GBF at a number of levels. Firstly, it relates to several of the so-called support mechanisms of the GBF. Of course, the emerging knowledge management component, which was mentioned by Frederick in the beginning, but also the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development, which is closely related to knowledge management. Secondly, PANORAMA as an entire initiative and through the application of its methodology in the development and the implementation of national biodiversity strategies and targets also contributes centrally to all of Goal D, but especially to Target 20 and of course Target 21, which is the one on knowledge management. And then thirdly, PANORAMA has a role with regards to many of the, what you could call the thematic targets. And its role in relation to these targets is executed through the PANORAMA communities with its respective coordinators. And the role there is to support the gathering, analysis, documentation, dissemination, and replication of existing practice to achieve the targets, for example, the 30 by 30. So in doing so, PANORAMA can provide concrete examples that showcase how global plans and strategies, but also regional and national plans and strategies that relate to these individual targets can be implemented. One example is Target 4 on species conservation. We have an existing theme or community in PANORAMA on species conservation. IUCN and partners have developed the Global Species Action Plan, and PANORAMA can demonstrate through practical examples and analysis across these examples and active knowledge exchange on these examples of how such a global plan to achieve Target 4 can be implemented. So the targets also provide sort of a development pathway for these PANORAMA themes or communities into the future. To make it even more concrete, I'm going to share a few examples of how we have concretely used or are using PANORAMA's knowledge exchange approach, mostly through different projects of the partner organizations. For example, we have worked through several projects at regional level. We had a project implemented by IUCN and other partners in the Western Indian Ocean, which supported knowledge exchange on locally managed marine areas, looking for strong LMMAs in the region that are really long-standing success stories, documenting the key lessons learned behind these successful LMMAs, and then supporting exchange with other countries along in the region to support further rollout of the LMMA model as appropriate, obviously locally and in the different countries based on the existing lessons learned. Another example of a regional format are so-called Blue Solutions forums that we organized a few years ago already. Those were very large events involving marine and coastal practitioners from a whole continent, such as Africa, a whole large region, around 100 people coming together over several days, again, all centered around this notion of existing solutions and the key lessons learned and success factors behind them, and discussing what can be replicated in other countries, how and what would be needed, what are enabling factors to drive replication of existing good practices in marine and coastal conservation. We also integrate solution case studies into training courses that we run for site managers of World Heritage sites. So that's another tangible example. And then a very interesting case of the use of the PANORAMA methodology at the level of a national government agency is CONAN, which is the Mexican Protected Area Agency. They have systematically used PANORAMA's case study format to document insights from their projects on protected areas and climate change. So as an institution, they've embraced this methodology for their own internal knowledge management. There are many other examples, so this is just to give you some inspiration of how you might want to use PANORAMA or how you might like to partner with us. Now, looking ahead, PANORAMA needs to align itself closely with the objectives and structure of the GBF. And this is really the headline of our strategy for the coming 5 to 7 years, endorsed by all the partner organizations and Germany as our key donor. And there are a number of key processes or areas of work that we're going to drive forward to support that. We're looking at building new strategic partnerships to that end. So we have signed a memorandum of understanding between GIZ and IUCN on behalf of the PANORAMA partnership and the CBD Secretariat to work closely together on knowledge management for the GBF, and we've identified some joint areas of work with the CBD. We're working on a major revamp of the web platform. We are also looking to diversify and solidify the funding model for the entire initiative, improve our tracking of impact, especially around uptake of knowledge, and finally also link to other relevant initiatives in this space, such as the NBSUP Accelerator Partnership, UNDP and UNAP, who are behind that partnership. Also PANORAMA partners, IUCN has expressed interest to become involved as well. And it has been proposed that PANORAMA could become the knowledge management arm of the Accelerator Partnership. So we'll figure out what that could look like. Very quickly, a very exciting upcoming development is a major relaunch of the web platform, which is the backbone of the PANORAMA initiative. And the new platform will come out early next year. And we've taken a very user-centric approach to make it more accessible, more inclusive in terms of ways in which people can both share as well as explore the solution knowledge and improve language accessibility, etc. The platform will be repositioned also as a key tool that supports the strategic positioning around aligning very closely with the GBF structure. That includes, for example, enhancing interoperability with other relevant online resources, such as those managed by the CBD. Some specific activity packages that we have identified and I'm also actively seeking funding for and are planning to work on hand in hand with the CBD include, for example, active solution sourcing on key topics that relate to elements of the GBF, such as individual targets. We're also very keen to conduct trainings, probably virtual trainings with a number of partner countries on developing the knowledge management component of their NBSUPs and integrating knowledge management into the implementation process, maybe as part of the CBD's KM4B initiative. In close collaboration with national partners and related initiatives, we're also hoping to co-organize knowledge management workshops in a number of partner countries to support solution knowledge exchange towards implementation of national biodiversity targets and NBSAPs. Another important area of work is around interoperability between the new web platform and all of the CBD managed platforms and channels, such as the clearinghouse mechanism, social media channels. And that includes also harmonizing the tagging and aligning the way that solutions and building blocks are categorized on the PANORAMA platform more closely with the GBF taxonomy. So how can we work together? We're really looking to support national governments and other actors involved in biodiversity conservation in making knowledge management an integral part of the process at national level. So we're very interested to go full circle on the knowledge identification, documentation, active sharing, etc., with a small set of countries. We can offer services around knowledge management and exchange at the institutional level. And we're also looking to link up more strongly with other like-minded initiatives and institutions. So all of these are areas of collaboration that we're very keen to explore further. If there's interest, please do contact us. And before I close, I do have another quick poll on the matter of collaborating. So I hope you can see that on your screen now. Giving everybody just a moment to go through that. Okay, let's see the results. Okay. Right, it looks like almost all of the proposed areas of work are important in terms of how PANORAMA can support CBD parties and other actors in achieving the GBF. So that's very interesting to know that we should pursue all of these areas, probably with almost equal priority. And I don't think we can see any answers that people might have typed to the second open-ended question. But of course, if you have suggestions, please get in touch. And with that, let me close. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mari, for your excellent presentation, highlighting the breadth of community-driven conservation successes being shared through IUCN PANORAMA platform. The solutions you presented demonstrate the power of participatory approaches and integrating traditional knowledge to achieve impact. You haven't seen it, but I'm a little bit struggling because we have two systems here for hearing and speaking, and therefore I need to juggle between two systems. I'm sorry, so if you hear echo in the next session, because now we are about to have 30 minutes to address questions that you have raised online. I've seen a few questions that Tim has answered already. Maybe you can summarize in a few words what the questions were. And you are lucky because while Mary was presenting, you could already answer. But I hope all the questions will come in as well for Mary to answer later on. So please, Tim, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So there was a question that came through via the Q&A, which I did answer in text. This was from Anjuli Rochette, who was asking whether I thought that GBIF data can directly contribute to calculating indicators of the monitoring of the GBF monitoring framework, and if so, whether I had examples to which of which potential indicators they could contribute to. And then she qualified that by saying that she was referring to national indicators. Well, I can partially answer that. I'm actually also involved in the process through the CBD, through the ARTEG, the Ad Hoc Technical Expert Group on Indicators. So I'm very sort of deeply into the discussions there. One of the challenges, of course, is that there's still a lot of discussion and clarification around the headline indicators in terms of the methodologies to be used, because although those indicators were agreed in Montreal through the monitoring framework, in some cases what was agreed does not yet have a developed methodology. So I've given some examples there of certainly with regard to the headline indicator, which is under development for target 6 on invasive alien species, a component of that indicator which measures the rate of establishment of invasive alien species at the national level, because of course headline indicators are designed and need to be applied at the national level. A component of that will indeed be looking at the occurrence records through all available sources that provide the evidence of when at least the first record of an invasive species came into a country. So that's an example of where, of course, there are other aspects that need to go into that indicator, but having the best available occurrence records, in this case of invasive species, would be a component of developing that indicator. Also, at a much earlier stage of development, will be an indicator towards target 21, which needs to measure in some way the availability of data, information, and knowledge. Now, exactly how you bring that together as an indicator is still very much open for discussion, but at least with regard to the data part, looking at the availability of data as it comes through GBIF would, we imagine, be at least one part of that, of what would need to go into that indicator. Looking at the much longer list of complementary and component and complementary indicators, there are already quite a few examples there, and I've listed 3: the Species Habitat Index, Species Protection Index, and the Protected Area Representativeness and Connectedness Index, so-called Park Index. All of those 3 will use occurrence data flowing through GBIF as part of the overall index that provides those indicators. So typically GBIF and the kind of data that we're dealing with will be a component, a data layer, if you like, that will go into bigger constructed indicators. So I hope that goes a little way towards answering that point. There was also through the chat, I had a question from, apologies for the pronunciation if it's wrong, Ji-Yoon Lee, in fact, I think I've had to leave the call, and asking whether GBIF is also sharing relevant biodiversity data produced by intergovernmental competent bodies in marine areas beyond national jurisdiction, such as regional fisheries bodies or International Seabed Authority, deep data, etc. And I put an answer in the chat there that I think it's a good opportunity just to mention that GBIF as a global network dealing with all sources of data works very closely in partnership with OBIS, which is the Ocean Biodiversity Information System that comes into the UNESCO system through the International Oceanographic Commission, which is if you like, the specialist network that's bringing in data from marine-based oceanographic institutions. So as far as possible, we're aiming to get to a position where everything that flows through OBIS is also getting into GBIF, and we use very much the same tools and standards. And I think we'd need to dig a little bit into the content there to see whether those particular sources are already providing data. But for sure, through that network, the OBIS Marine Network, there will be a significant amount of marine data that relates to areas beyond national jurisdiction. So certainly we're not confined to data that's within territorial waters or exclusive economic zones. I think those were the two that I managed to answer. There was one then that was, I think, more directly addressed to Marie. Did you see that one, Marie? It was one in the Q&A.
Yes, I did, thanks. And I just answered it in writing, but I can quickly repeat my response here for everybody's sake. So the question was about whether there will be or there are entry points via each target of the GBF so that users can easily relate their search on the PANORAMA web platform in relation to implementation of GBF targets. So I've translated this to mean that solutions and maybe individual building blocks as well should be tagged with the GBF target or targets that they directly contribute to. It's a great question. We actually had that functionality for the IG targets in terms of tags that were assigned by the solution provider as part of the case study drafting process, where the person would select the IG targets to which the case contributes to directly. And that was then verified at a light level through the review process. But it has to be taken with a grain of salt because it's self-assigned by the solution providers who might have different understandings of or limited understanding also of these global targets. So it's something we have been having in place, but that was of limited value. Also, there was so far no way of filtering by IG target. So with this new web platform that I mentioned, we're about to launch, we're definitely going to take this to the next level. Probably not for surely not for the initial launch in early 2024, but for a next development stage. So the aim would definitely be that there is some way of assigning solutions to individual targets in a way that's robust, that's standardized, and that conforms with what the target actually says. And that can also be filtered by, so that from the user side, you can easily identify all relevant examples that make a direct contribution to target 3 or whichever target you're interested in. So it's definitely part of the plans. It's also something where we think we can work together very well with the CBD Secretariat and their work around an ontology of the GBF, and we're really planning to use that as much as possible. And it's also an area of work where there's great scope for ensuring greater interoperability between all these platforms. The more we work with standardized classification systems, and then obviously, trying to use the GBF targets as much as possible as part of your content classification system is an obvious choice. then the more we can also link these platforms to make it easier for users to really navigate their way across the plethora of knowledge, data, information, resources, and platforms on the internet.
Thank you very much, both of you, for answering those questions. There are two pending questions in the question and answer. Shall we start with the difficult one? I think it's the one on top on our screen, which is, how is sustainable use as articulated in the KM GBF qualified and quantified in knowledge management and data warehousing? Maybe, Tim, you can start with this one, and then Mary.
Yes, I was hoping you wouldn't start with me, but yeah, it's a tricky one, I think, to interpret in the context of GBIF, in the sense that what we are dealing with in terms of data, I think would, given that we're essentially looking at the evidence that comes through from observation and collection of species in the environment. We wouldn't be, I think, the place to or the location and the information source that would start to dig in to an issue such as sustainable use. So it's difficult, I think, to think of ways in which you would expect GBIF to deal directly with that as a component of knowledge and data handling. Having said that, of course, many of the tools and research and the studies that help to determine sustainable use would, again, as a component, often need to rely on that primary data relating to species observations, both past and present. So it's probably not a very satisfactory answer, but I'm not sure I'd be able to give a better one, really, with regard to what you would expect GBIF to be handling.
Yeah, I don't want to attempt a comprehensive answer to that question either, but I can apply it to the context of PANORAMA, and I think this relates to how we define solution case studies, how we review them, and what sort of criteria we apply for what is a solution. It's a question we get very often, and of course that can be controversial, especially when it comes to different notions of what constitutes sustainable use. What is sustainable, really? How do you deal with competing objectives, and a solution then often lies in the eyes of the beholder. So the solution provider and the organization they represent might be fully convinced that this was a success story. Let's say conservation outcomes were achieved, but another party that was part of the process might disagree because maybe local communities were disenfranchised or it created negative outcomes somewhere else. So that's something that is definitely very relevant to how we deal with the submission and the vetting process in PANORAMA. And the general answer there is that indeed, the solution is in the eye of the beholder. So we don't verify solutions. It's firstly just for capacity reasons not possible, but it's also not part of the concept. So our approach is that everybody has relevant knowledge to share, and everybody is also free to disagree with how that knowledge is being presented, for example, by commenting on the solution on the platform. And so this is quite a generic answer, but I think it relates to a specific solution that might describe a sustainable use a scenario that, according to the provider, was a successful case, but someone else might disagree with that. But I'm wondering if Ari or Frederick, you might have a more general answer on this, because the question is also about how this is articulated in the knowledge management component of the GBF, I believe.
Yeah, Thank you. I think you've answered it well in the sense that I think knowledge depends on the user. When you get this, how do you see it useful for you, and how are you going to apply it? So I don't think we can in a document like the KM component or any other, we can define that ahead of time. I think what we need to do is have the flexibilities that allow users to have access to these different sources of knowledge and make their own determination on how to use that. And in the context of sustainable use, in the context of protected areas, in the context of anything that each user is confronted with. So, and I think the benefit of having all these access to various sources of knowledge, data, helps the user, empowers the user to determine the best course of action. And that's how we're saying we strive to make sure that the decision makers, the implementers on the ground have these suite of tools and solutions that they can decide to apply and adapt. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Harry, and colleagues, panelists, for your answer. Yeah, Tim, I see you speaking, maybe.
I was just going to go on to the next one because it's addressed directly to me. So would you like me to answer that one?
Yes, please go ahead.
This is asking what is GBIF's policy around curating the data? How does GBIF see its role to ensure data is accurate and valid? This is a very important question, and one that we of course very often get in when we make presentations such as this. I think it's important to in a sense be realistic that we are dealing, as I indicated, with very large volumes of data from very different types of sources, heterogeneous sources. There is a certain amount that we can do at the automated level to detect likely errors or issues as the data comes in. And we have quite a large number of routines that we operate as we are harvesting and ingesting the data coming through our systems. For example, there will often be errors that will creep in just in the way that the data is organized. Like a very common one is that there might be a flipping of the latitude and longitude, so that a species is shown as being in a completely different part of the world than that in which it is recorded. And there are often there are standard ways we can detect that. So, for example, if we find that the latitude and longitude on a record doesn't correspond with the country as stated on that record, then we'll mark it as an issue. We won't show it on the map. And sometimes we can detect that it's probably a problem of negatives instead of positives. So that's just one example of quite a wide range of likely errors that we can detect and we can flag, and all of those issues are then openly shown on the data. We of course encourage through our network of national nodes and data publishers for quality routines to be applied at the lower level, the level before it comes into GBIF, so that we have, if you like, a network and a nested form of quality control. And indeed, we don't take, for example, data directly from individuals. We always require the registration of an institution to be endorsed as a bona fide institution. So, but then I think the final, and maybe the most important answer to this is that everything that you see through GBIF is completely transparent in terms of the source of that data. So for any data point, you're always able to look at the data set it came from, and there will always be at least a space for metadata to describe the methodologies and the origins of that data and what kind of quality routines were applied in the collection of that data, so that it's always, in the end, available to the user to look back at the source of data and then make decisions based on that. of its fitness for use for the particular application that's being applied. So, I mean, for example, there will be some researchers who might take a different approach and attitude to data that arises from citizen science networks to data that comes through from natural history collections where there's a voucher and maybe a photograph to verify the specimen. So I think the overall answer is that in a big data system, the data is never going to be perfect unless you impose very, very strict, if you like, gatekeeping controls, which is not practical to do in a network the size of GBIF. And so as far as possible, we work towards the best available data, but there will always be a caution that within the overall body of those records, it's not going to be 100% perfect. And so standard statistical methodologies for allowing and screening out, for example, outliers where they would appear in the data that you've selected from GBIF would be regarded as standard and good practice in the way that GBIF mediated data is used.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim, for this. And some last words maybe from Mary, because we are running out of time already. It went so fast. So Mary, please.
Thanks very much. I don't have much more to say other than just reiterating really the invitation to reach out to suggest how PANORAMA can be more useful for the work that you do at whatever level, local, subnational, national, regional. We're really looking to build new collaborations, especially in support of the knowledge management component of the GBF, as I said, and where we're recalibrating the strategic focus of the entire initiative to align closely with that sort of objective to directly support knowledge management for GBF implementation. So it's a very good moment for us to receive new ideas, new expressions of interest to collaborate. And I'm very much looking forward to anybody reaching out. And thanks very much for joining us today, and to the CVD for the opportunity.
And thank you very much. Well, time has run out so fast. I think it was so interesting that I didn't realize we are almost out of time. And I would like to thank both of you for the wonderful presentations. And also just to make a few comments, I put a comment in the chat really to emphasize the point that all these efforts at the end of the day, we need to be aligned to support what's going on at the country level and also at the more local levels, because that's where it matters most. This is where we are going to achieve the targets or miss the targets. So, and already I think GBIF and PANORAMA and IUCN in general are already doing that. But just to reemphasize that that's where it matters. That's where action is. And at the global level, we've had so many databases, so many platforms. But if it doesn't make it to the national level and having the users at the national level leveraging that, I don't think we'll be able to achieve the targets. And just maybe as try to respond to the question that was asked by Anissa at the end, the time has run out, unfortunately. Just to say that I think there are so many efforts now ongoing to try to consolidate these ongoing initiatives. You've heard about the KM component, which now I think is being referred to as the knowledge management strategy to support the implementation of the GBF. Through that, there will be efforts to try to align all the different initiatives and efforts dealing with knowledge, information, and data. And also maybe some of you have heard about the Global Knowledge Support Service, which will be again helping to bring together different players and try to orchestrate the efforts to bring knowledge, data, and information closer to the users, so that we know the different assets, knowledge assets out there that can be leveraged to support the GBF implementation, but most importantly, the NBSAP implementation. So thank you very much. I'll hand back to Fred for the concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Jerry, and the team in Mari. So the next webinar is scheduled for November 28th. We will have presenters from the United Nations Secretariat Department of Economic and Social Affairs, or UNDESA, and from United Nations Development Program, UNDP, who will discuss with us how information and knowledge around the SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals, are cataloged and shared. We can learn a lot from their experience, as the SDG have been adopted 8 years ago already. This will be the 10th and the penultimate webinar in this first series. Dear participants, this marks the conclusion of today's Knowledge Management for Biodiversity webinar. We appreciate your active participation, your insightful questions that you had, and we wish you all a productive and enjoyable week. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.